If you don't know this name of Joe Haldeman, you are not paying much attention to science fiction. This was published in 2007, so basically brand new. Hello, welcome to I Read This Book with Chris. This is Chris. This is the book. The Accidental Time Machine by Joe Haldeman. While discussing this book, The Accidental Time Machine, I've got myself old-fashioned. Good stuff. Accidental Time Machine by Joe Haldeman. You should know this name. If you don't know this name of Joe Haldeman, you are not paying much attention to science fiction. He wrote The Forever War, which might be my favorite Vietnam-era military science fiction, which I know is a very subset of literature. If you take all of literature and you bring it down to science fiction, and from science fiction to military science fiction, and from military science fiction to Vietnam military science fiction, that's quite a narrowing. However, there are a lot of science fiction books that are military and are influenced quite drastically by the Vietnam War. Science fiction was in its heyday before that, and there's lots of science fiction written. A lot of these guys who came back wrote science fiction. The Forever War might be the best. I haven't read all of them. There's a lot of them, but I think it's quite good. It won some awards and stuff. Anyway, that's not what this book is. This book is The Accidental Time Machine by Joe Haldeman. The cover has nothing super exciting on there. It's like a clock that's broken with some flames or light particles. Grad school dropout Matt Fuller is toiling as a lowly research assistant at MIT when, while measuring quantum relationships between gravity and light, his calibrator disappears and reappears 1 second later. In fact, every time Matt hits the reset button, the machine goes missing 12 times longer. Basically, this is exactly the whole plot is summarized up in that. You got this guy, obviously smart, obviously not the smartest guy in the world, but smart enough to go to school, go to grad school at MIT. Never ends up getting his PhD, and is just working in one of the labs. And he's a lab assistant. He creates a device that, for whatever reason, that no one is ever fully able to explain, it turns into a time machine. And the time machine is just a little box, the calibrator, some fancy science thing. It turns into a time machine where every time it gets exponentially larger. So the first time is like a second, then 12 seconds, then 144 seconds, then continues on. And he realizes what's happening, but he videotapes the machine as it moves. He gets a turtle, he attaches the turtle to this time machine. The turtle goes in the future with the time machine, and he tries to figure out what he can do. So he figures out the time machine will take anything metal with it, and the metal thing will act as a Faraday cage, capturing anything inside of it to travel with him. And so he goes inside, hops in, appears 38 days later, I believe that's the amount of days later, in a car that he borrowed from his friend. It traveled a greater distance than he knew. He got arrested because the car was marked as stolen because his friend who he borrowed it from died. His friend was a drug dealer who had a fancy car. He gets released from jail. Being released from jail, he steals the time machine, disappears, appears on a highway right as he's about to get hit by a car. He hits it again, and this time he appears in a future where his graduate advisor, a professor at MIT, realized what he was doing, figured out the math behind it, and was able to predict exactly when and where he'd show up. So Matt shows up exactly when Professor Marsh thought he would. He gets tired of being experimented on and hops into the future again. It's about 140 some odd years in the future, and a lot has changed. The first several times he jumped, not a whole lot had changed. But this time, after running away from his problems and hopping into the future, the whole eastern coast of the United States was taken over by some sort of puritanical theocracy, which rejects most technology, a lot of science. He goes to MIT to try to figure out what's going on. They were expecting him somehow, and this theocracy is actually controlled by a robot, Jesus, that uses its science and satellites in order to control this theocracy. Very strange. He's made a professor at MIT in this future, gets a graduate assistant, Martha. Instead of following these orders of this Jesus, he goes and he hops into the future again. This time when he hops into the future, he travels a great distance. He's brought into LA. It's actually somewhere in New Mexico, but apparently LA has taken over the whole western side of the United States. Everyone is rich and kind of dumb because there's no reason to do a whole lot because computers have taken over everything. And this AI who's taken over everything realizes exactly who Matt is as soon as he travels through time. Matt and Martha, because she goes and travels with him, and has made basically a spaceship in order to continue hopping through time, because this AI has this strange idea that she wants to continue until the heat death of the universe. So they hop forward and they hop forward again, at which point they meet some humans that are so advanced, and their science and mathematics is so advanced they can't explain it to Matt in a way where it'll make sense. In the future with the time machine. And he tries to figure out what he can do. So he figures out the time machine will take anything metal with it, and the metal thing will act as a Faraday cage, capturing anything inside of it to travel with him. And so he goes inside, hops in, appears 38 days later, I believe that's the amount of days later, in a car that he borrowed from his friend. It traveled a greater distance than he knew. They give this AI the spaceship to continue to travel forward into the future by herself so she can try to reach the heat death of the universe, which for whatever reason is her goal. And they take Matt and Martha back to MIT. However, at this point, they're several million years in the future. And so when they're able to bring him back to MIT, they are off slightly on the time by about 140 years. So, since he was a grad student, he knows all the physics of that time. And he gets a job at MIT, eventually gets enrolled at MIT, becomes a professor, and is able to use his knowledge to become well off. Not, enough where he can become famous, but just well enough where he can become a professor. And he lives his life out. This is the story of the accidental time machine. What would happen if you found a time machine that could only travel in the future, you could not control it, and you were slightly immature wherever every time anything came up, your solution was, let's just hit the button? That's what this book is about. It's not going to win awards. It shouldn't win awards. However, it's just a fun little romp. I picked this up because I love time travel. There's nothing super crazy or advanced about this time travel story. They don't actually ever explain it. They say it shoots out particles in some other dimension that we can't notice. And then the people who do understand time travel say, we can't explain the math to you because you're not, you can't comprehend it. I don't know. But it's basically, if you were to travel in the future, what would happen? Well, because this starts off in the future. It starts off in 2047. Something like that. So it's already in our future. And he continues to hop on. And I guess the idea is you never know what's going to happen. People have this idea. People like to straight line project. Which is, if this is what's going on in the world, and good things are happening, they just assume the world's going to keep going like this. And if bad things happening, it's going to go like this. And things are going to get worse and worse and worse. And yet he shows that the future could be better or worse. And it could get worse or get better. And there will be times where people are happy to live and times where people are unhappy to live and all this stuff. Nothing super exciting. They land in times where they could probably go and exist and be happy. And yet they don't. want that. They just want to go back to their own time, to Matt's own time. Not a whole lot. If you like time travel and you want to pick this up, it's a good read. It's very quick. It's only like 270 pages. It's very modern for me. Most of the books I read are not of this millennium. This was published in 2007. So basically brand new. Only 18 years old. But fun little book. If you see it, pick it up. Thanks for watching.